He was abandoned. Once a powerful king of the savannah, now reduced to bones and scars, left to die alone in the dust by the very pride he protected. Where were the cameras then? Where were the conservation slogans, the proud park tours, the humans who claimed to care? Oba, the lion, didn't fade into legend. He was left to suffer, starving, broken, forgotten. This isn't just nature. This is negligence. And yet, amid the silence of his final days, two people decided to do what no one else would. They saw him. They cared. They acted. At the edge of Makari Plains, a vast and sun-scorched wilderness in Namibia, an old male lion walked alone through the brittle grass. His name was once whispered in awe by rangers and feared by rival prides, Oba, the king of the Southern Territory. In his prime, he had ruled with unmatched strength, leading his pride through many hunts, fierce battles, and roaring nights under the stars. But now, Oba was a shadow of the legend he once was. His once magnificent mane, thick and golden like the setting sun, had faded into clumps of tangled, thinning fur. His eyes, once blazing with dominance, had sunk deep into their sockets, dulled by age and exhaustion. Oba's ribs pressed tightly against his scarred hide, every breath a visible strain. With each staggering step, his legs trembled, not from fear, but from sheer fatigue. Time had not been kind. His teeth, once weapons of precision and survival, had mostly fallen out. Only a few jagged stubs remained, useless against the quick-footed prey that once feared him. The younger lions of his pride had sensed his weakness. In the brutal law of nature, mercy is a myth. He was cast out, exiled from the family he had led for nearly a decade. For days, Oba wandered alone, retracing paths he once marked with dominance. Now, they felt foreign to him. The silence of the plains was deafening, broken only by the occasional buzz of flies or the distant bark of jackals. Sometimes he let out a weak roar, more a whisper of memory than a call of power. No one answered. He had tried to hunt once or twice, stalking a small herd of springbok near a shrinking watering hole. But his legs betrayed him. His jaws couldn't close with the force needed. He collapsed under the heat, panting, his mouth dry and cracked. Flies clung to the open sores on his legs and hips, wounds that once told stories of victory, now symbols of his slow, painful decline. Tourists on a distant safari caught glimpses of him, an eerie figure standing motionless in the grass, like a forgotten monument of the past. A few snapped photos, unable to tell whether he was alive or already gone. In the heart of Makari, nature was moving on. But Oba was holding on. Just barely. When a local wildlife photographer uploaded images of the frail lion onto a conservation forum, they quickly caught the attention of Lena and Kwame, two field officers from the Namibian Wildlife Rescue Unit. Lena, a seasoned ranger with sharp instincts, stared at the screen in silence. Kwame, younger but deeply passionate, clenched his jaw. Both recognized the lion instantly. "It's Oba," Lena whispered. "He's still alive." They didn't need to say more. That night, they prepared a rescue kit, tranquilizer darts, antibiotics, energy supplements, and several pounds of freshly prepared soft meat. The next morning, just before dawn, they set out across the golden expanse of the Makari Plains in their old, dust-covered truck. Makari was vast and unyielding. The heat rose quickly, shimmering off the horizon in invisible waves. For hours, they scanned the savannah, looking for tracks, broken grass, anything that might signal Oba's presence. Every set of lion prints brought a flicker of hope, then disappointment when they led nowhere. But then, Kwame spotted something, barely visible depressions in the dry sand, irregular and dragging slightly. "He's limping," Kwame murmured, tracing the shape of the paw. "He's close." They followed the trail in silence. The sun was high now, beating down on them mercilessly. Sweat clung to their backs, dust coated their skin, but they pressed on. Finally, beneath the shadow of a lone acacia tree, they saw him. Oba. He lay on his side, his chest slowly rising and falling. His eyes were half closed, his breath shallow. He looked like he could vanish with the next gust of wind. Lena raised the tranquilizer gun, her hand steady despite the ache in her arm. But something in Oba's posture stopped her. There was no tension. No fight left. Just the weight of surrender. "Wait," Kwame said softly, placing a hand on her arm. "Let's not scare him." Not yet. They decided to try a different approach. Lena slowly stepped forward, a piece of blood-red meat in her gloved hand. She didn't speak, only moved gently, letting her presence be known without threatening. Kwame stood nearby, scanning the surroundings for any danger. Oba lifted his head just slightly. His eyes met Lena's, not with fear, but confusion. He sniffed the air. The scent of food seemed to stir something inside him. With great effort, he stretched his neck and took a small bite. His jaws trembled, but he managed to chew and swallow. Lena knelt down, carefully watching. As Oba chewed, she slipped a syringe of vitamins and antibiotics into his flank. He flinched but didn't resist. Hunger outweighed fear. Kwame let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "We have a chance." For the next few minutes, they stayed near, feeding him small pieces, offering sips of water. Oba didn't growl. He didn't retreat. He simply ate, rested, and watched them with tired eyes that no longer saw enemies, only the last glimmers of kindness. The sun had begun to dip behind the distant dunes when Lena and Kwame decided it was time to move Oba. They knew the window was short, any delay could mean infection would spread, or his weakened body might simply give out. But how do you move a lion who barely has the strength to breathe, let alone stand? They retrieved the transport crate from the truck, a sturdy metal cage lined with straw and covered with a tarp to shield from the sun. Normally, tranquilizers would be used at this stage for safety. But Oba wasn't a threat. He wasn't roaring or pacing. He just watched, breathing slowly, his tail barely twitching in the dirt. "We'll try to lead him," Lena said, her voice low, unsure. "If he walks on his own, maybe it'll give him some sense of control." Kwame nodded and prepared another small tray of meat, laced this time with mild sedatives. He approached with a soft whistle, crouching several feet away. "Hey, old man," he said gently. "One more step. You've made it this far." Oba raised his head, then slowly, painfully, placed one paw in front of the other. His legs shook beneath him, and for a moment Lena thought he might collapse. But he didn't. Something was keeping him going. Whether it was the scent of food, the flicker of instinct, or the presence of these strange humans who hadn't hurt him, Oba pressed forward. Each step was a slow-motion battle. Dust kicked up from beneath his claws. His ribs heaved with effort. When he reached the open door of the crate, he paused. He turned his head to look back at Lena. For a second, everything went still. It was as if Oba was asking her, "Is this safe? Is this really the end of my fight?" Lena stepped forward, placed a hand gently against his mane, thin and coarse, but still the crown of a king. "You're going home," she whispered. Then, with a final tremble, Oba stepped into the crate and collapsed on the straw floor. Kwame quietly swung the door closed and latched it, his hands shaking not from fear, but from relief. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Lena smiled. "We've got him." As they lifted the crate into the back of the truck, curious eyes from a passing safari vehicle looked on. A few gasps, some hurried photographs. But this wasn't a spectacle. This was a farewell, of a king leaving his battlefield, not in defeat, but in peace. They began the drive back to the Wildlife Care Center, moving slowly to avoid any sudden jolts. Oba lay motionless, eyes half open, breathing softly. But there was no panic in him now. Just calm. And in that silence, riding through the fading golden light, Lena whispered, "You held on long enough. Now it's our turn." By the time they reached the Namibian Wildlife Recovery Center, the sky had turned a deep indigo, and the first stars blinked above the distant ridges. Staff were already waiting near the gate, alerted by Lena and Kwame's call during the drive. The moment the truck pulled in, the atmosphere shifted, urgency mixed with quiet reverence. They carefully unloaded the cage and carried it into the emergency triage area, a quiet space away from the noise of other animals. Oba didn't growl, didn't thrash, he simply watched, his body still, his breath labored. His presence, even in that weakened state, demanded respect. Veterinarian Dr. Anna Mensah, an expert in geriatric wildlife care, knelt beside the cage and examined him. Her face, usually stoic, showed unmistakable concern. "He's severely malnourished," she said softly. "Multiple pressure sores. Old injuries. And almost no functional teeth." The team worked quickly but gently. Anna cleaned the worst of the wounds and applied antiseptic ointments. Another technician administered antibiotics and low-dose painkillers. Oba winced a few times, but never snarled. There was no fight left in him, only quiet endurance. Lena and Kwame watched from the doorway. Lena's hands were folded tightly across her chest, her brows drawn in concern. Kwame leaned against the wall, arms slack, his face unreadable. "You think he's going to make it?" Kwame asked, barely above a whisper. Lena didn't answer right away. "Then, if he has even a little strength left, yes. But more than that. I think he wants to live. That matters." They moved Oba to a private recovery enclosure, lined with soft straw, shaded from the sun, and monitored around the clock. Over the next few days, the team built a slow but steady routine. In the mornings, they cleaned his wounds and changed his bandages. Midday, they offered him minced meat soaked in broth, easy to chew and digest. Hydration was carefully controlled, using electrolyte solutions to help him regain balance. Oba didn't resist. In fact, after the second day, he began to respond to the presence of his caretakers. He would lift his head slightly when Lena entered, or twitch his ear when Kwame spoke. Small signs. But they meant everything. By the end of the first week, a bit of color returned to his coat. His eyes, though still sunken, had regained a glimmer of alertness. He could stand for short periods now, especially when he smelled food. For Lena and Kwame, those moments were victories. "He's not just surviving," Kwame said one morning, watching Oba lap up his meal. "He's choosing to stay." Lena smiled, brushing straw from her jeans. Maybe for the first time in his life, he's learning what it means to rest. To be safe. In the wild, rest was a luxury. Now, in this place built on compassion, Oba was slowly finding peace. Weeks passed. Each morning, the caretakers would find Oba lying more upright, his breathing steadier, his coat slightly fuller. Though his majestic mane would never grow thick again, patches of his fur had begun to soften under the care of healing hands and quiet companionship. He would never hunt again. Never patrol the boundaries of a territory. Never roar to signal dominance. But here, within the safety of the recovery enclosure, he no longer had to. Every day, Kwame would stop by after his rounds, sitting just outside the mesh door with a notepad or a snack. Sometimes he would talk about the other animals, sometimes about the heat, or just sit in silence. Oba, surprisingly, would edge closer, resting his head near the bars, like an old soldier listening to stories of a world he once ruled. Lena, too, made her visits. She would stroke his mane gently through the enclosure, check the healing on his legs, and whisper softly. One afternoon, as she leaned in with a fresh bowl of food, Oba pressed his head against her hand, not a push, but a slow, deliberate lean. It wasn't dominance. It wasn't instinct. It was trust. Fragile. Hard-earned. Real. The veterinary team had long stopped wondering how long he had left. No one knew. His body bore the signs of irreversible aging, organs slowly failing, vision dimming. But they knew one thing for certain. He wasn't dying alone. One evening, as the sun bathed the plains in a golden hue, Lena, Kwame, and Dr. Anna sat by his enclosure. Oba lay on his side, breathing slow but calm, watching the horizon. He used to rule all this, Kwame said, his voice full of quiet awe. And now, he looks at it like an old friend. Maybe he's saying goodbye, Anna added gently. Oba didn't roar that evening. He hadn't for months. But as the wind shifted, it carried a soft, low rumble from his chest, a breath, a sigh, a memory of the voice that once echoed across the plains. That night, he slept deeply, and for the first time in years, without fear. He passed away quietly in his sleep 2 days later. No drama. No pain. Just a soft silence that settled across the center like the last page of a great novel. They buried him beneath a wild fig tree on the edge of the sanctuary. A simple wooden marker read, Oba, the last roar. King of Makari. Loved. Remembered. Free. For Lena and Kwame, and everyone who had witnessed his final journey, Oba became more than a lion. He was a symbol, of endurance, of grace in the face of decline, and of what kindness can offer, even when the wild turns away. Oba may have taken his final breath beneath the shelter of a fig tree, far from the wild plains he once ruled. But he didn't die forgotten. He didn't die unloved. In his final chapter, he was seen, cared for, and honored, not for his strength, but for his vulnerability. And maybe that's what makes a true king, not the battles he wins, but the dignity he carries in the silence after the war is over. His story reminds us that every life matters, even when the world has moved on. That compassion isn't weakness, it's the most powerful thing we can offer to a soul on the edge of fading. So the next time you see an animal in need, don't just look away. Be the reason it keeps going. Be the kindness that makes the difference. Oba's roar may be silent now. But his legacy lives on, in the hearts that choose to care. Orange Heart, if this story moved you, share it. Let it reach someone who needs to hear it. Pushpin, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more true stories that touch the heart and change the world. Hit the bell icon so you never miss a moment of compassion. Thank you for being part of Oba's journey.